Maggie stood frozen as the FBI slammed the pet shop doors shut. Her service dog, Ranger, barred from urgent care. Faces turned cold, voices silenced. Trapped outside, her desperate pleas drowned by flashing badges and locked gates. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as she stood frozen just inside the threshold, Ranger obediently seated at her side, his dark eyes scanning the room with quiet vigilance. The pet shop, usually a sanctuary of warmth, bustling with the joyful chaos of wagging tails and eager paws, felt claustrophobic and hostile now. The cheerful scent of treats and pet shampoo was replaced by an oppressive silence, thick with tension. Brad, the clerk, had folded his arms, his gaze hard and unyielding, a wall between Maggie and the help she desperately needed. Her mind raced, struggling to grasp the sudden reversal of her expectations. Just last week, the same shop had eagerly taken her appointment for Ranger's vaccinations, had smiled at her, had petted Ranger's ears with gentle hands. What had changed in these few days? Why was she being turned away now, treated like an intruder? Her voice, usually steady, faltered slightly as she repeated, "Ranger is a service dog. He's trained to protect me. The law says you can't refuse him." Brad's face remained unmoved, his tone flat but laced with an unsettling finality. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Rules are rules. No animals allowed." His eyes flicked toward the closed storefront windows, where the sharp silhouettes of uniformed FBI agents were visible, their faces impassive, their stances rigid like statues guarding a fortress. Maggie's stomach twisted, the familiar surge of frustration blooming into a cold knot of helplessness. This wasn't just about Ranger anymore. It was about the invisible barrier they were erecting between her and the life she fought to live. She felt the weight of every stare, every judgment from the few customers lingering near the entrance, their whispered conversations like cold drafts brushing against her skin. Was this what it meant to ask for basic dignity? To be denied simply because she needed help? Her gaze flicked down to Ranger's calm, unblinking eyes, his unconditional trust anchoring her in the storm. The dog's presence was more than companionship. It was survival, the thread holding her life together in moments when seizures threatened to pull her under. She remembered the countless times Ranger had alerted her just seconds before darkness fell, how his unwavering devotion had granted her freedom she'd once thought impossible. Now, that freedom felt like a fragile illusion, shattered by a petty policy and an indifferent government presence. The sudden arrival of the FBI agent had been the final blow. His voice was low, professional, but carried the cold edge of authority that allowed no room for negotiation. "This area is closed for security reasons. No one enters or leaves until further notice." Maggie's heart pounded, the sting of humiliation washing over her. She could see it in the agent's eyes. No empathy, no understanding of her needs, just the rigid enforcement of rules written far from the realities of people like her. Questions piled up in her mind. What security threat could justify locking out someone who relied on a service dog? Why was the law suddenly meaningless here? How could she explain that denying Ranger's vet care wasn't just an inconvenience? It was a threat to both their well-being. Her throat tightened as anger and despair wrestled within her. Every fiber of her being screamed for justice, yet the cold walls and locked doors mocked her fight. The world outside, once so full of promise, had narrowed to this small, suffocating space where she was invisible, erased, a problem to be contained. Ranger shifted slightly, sensing her distress but unflinching, his presence a steady beacon in the growing storm of uncertainty. Maggie clenched her fists, the taste of bitterness sharp on her tongue. She knew this moment would test her in ways she hadn't imagined, forcing her to confront not only the barriers others put before her, but the fears and doubts she kept hidden inside. For now, the shop stood silent, the doors sealed tight, and the fight for her rights just beginning. The sharp autumn wind bit at Maggie's cheeks as she stood on the cracked sidewalk outside the pet shop, her body tense, shoulders hunched against the cold. Ranger shifted uneasily at her side, pacing in small circles, his nails tapping against the concrete, a quiet agitation that mirrored Maggie's own rising anxiety. The buzz of her phone was relentless, messages from Dr. Patel, her vet, filled with frustration and concern. "We can't treat Ranger until this lockdown lifts," one read. Another, "Please stay safe. We're monitoring the situation closely." But time stretched interminably, hours bleeding into each other, every minute a cruel reminder of her helplessness. Behind the barricades, the FBI presence swelled. Agents in dark suits and tactical gear moved with clinical precision, their faces masks of professionalism, revealing nothing of the unease that churned beneath the surface. The crowd that had gathered on the sidewalks was growing too. Neighbors, strangers, reporters wielding cameras and microphones, drawn by the unfolding drama of the woman and her dog locked out of the vet clinic. Each passing moment intensified the gulf between Maggie and the life she fought so hard to live independently. This was no longer a simple inconvenience. It was a siege on her dignity, a stark violation of rights she had always taken for granted. Inside the sterile confines of the command post set up just beyond the shop's locked doors, Agent Daniel Reeves paced slowly, his mind a battlefield of conflict. He was a man trained to weigh risks, to act swiftly when danger loomed, yet the orders he enforced gnawed at him. The lockdown was critical. A credible threat had emerged. A shadow looming over the city whispered rumors of dangerous suspects moving near the clinic. But the image of Maggie and Ranger, cast out in the cold, pricked at his conscience. Denying access to a woman reliant on a service dog was not just a bureaucratic decision. It was a human cost Reeves could not easily dismiss. His jaw tightened as he replayed the chain of command, the cold logic that demanded sacrifice for the greater good. But inside, the lines blurred. How much suffering was acceptable before justice itself became compromised? Every glance at the live feeds outside, where cameras caught the sharp contrast between the crowd's growing sympathy and the agent's unwavering resolve, deepened the ache in his chest. There was no easy answer, only the weight of responsibility crushing down. Outside, the atmosphere shifted as friends of Maggie arrived in a small wave of solidarity, their voices urgent, pleading for understanding. "She needs that care," one woman said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Ranger is more than a pet. He's her lifeline." The crowd's murmur swelled into a chorus of support, neighbors chanting for fairness, demanding answers from the faceless authority barricading them away. Yet the growing compassion only underscored Maggie's pain. Ranger's restlessness became palpable, the finely tuned balance between dog and handler fraying with each denied moment of care. His ears flicked toward every noise, muscles coiled with tension, mirroring the storm gathering in Maggie's heart. Her hope, once fierce and unyielding, flickered precariously, threatened by the crushing weight of helplessness and the creeping shadow of despair. Then, as dusk painted the sky a bruised purple, a new revelation shattered the fragile calm. An anonymous tip leaked online and spreading like wildfire through social media and news outlets exposed the deeper truth. The FBI's lockdown was not just a precaution, but a calculated move to contain a high-profile operation targeting dangerous suspects rumored to be lurking near the clinic. The stakes were far higher than anyone had imagined, the danger real. And yet, the denial of Maggie's basic rights felt more unjust than ever. The city held its breath, caught between fear and outrage as the painful truth settled like ash on the cold concrete beneath Maggie's feet. The air outside the sealed pet clinic thickened with the fervor of a burgeoning movement. What had begun as Maggie's solitary struggle quickly blossomed into a collective outcry, voices rising in unison, demanding recognition, fairness, and respect. Her supporters, fueled by a potent mix of outrage and compassion, organized a peaceful protest just beyond the barricades, placards bearing simple but powerful slogans. Service dogs are rights. Disability is not optional. Access now, fluttered in the chilly breeze, held aloft by hands resolute and unwavering. The downtown streets, once quiet and unremarkable, pulsed with a new energy, the heartbeat of a community refusing to be ignored. Local journalists, once observers, became amplifiers. Television cameras and microphone booms punctuated the scene, broadcasting Maggie's story into living rooms across the region. Reporters framed the conflict not merely as a dispute over pet policy, but as a glaring symbol of systemic neglect, how crisis responses often trample the most vulnerable underfoot. News segments highlighted Maggie's quiet dignity, her unyielding insistence on dignity amid chaos. Interviews with disability rights advocates contextualized the moment within a larger, long overdue conversation about inclusion, accessibility, and justice in emergency protocols. Inside the sterile corridors where decisions weighed heavily on shoulders, Agent Daniel Reeves found himself a reluctant advocate. He had witnessed firsthand the deep human cost of rigid enforcement, the anguish etched across Maggie's face, the restless energy of Ranger, who was far more than a dog, but a lifeline tethering Maggie to safety and independence. Wrestling with the narrow margin between protocol and compassion, Reeves navigated tense negotiations with his superiors, his voice steady but insistent. He argued not from rebellion, but from conviction, that security need not be blind to humanity, that safeguarding the public did not require the erasure of individual rights. The breakthrough was painstaking but profound. The FBI agreed to grant Maggie and Ranger limited access to the vet clinic under strict security conditions, escorted in, closely monitored, yet finally allowed entry. When the barricades parted and Maggie stepped inside, the weight of hours spent locked out, the humiliation, the fear, the simmering anger flooded to the surface. Tears welled unbidden, blurring her vision as Ranger's calm, steady presence steadied her trembling frame. The vet team moved quickly, trained hands administering care with urgency and precision. Each touch, each whispered reassurance restored more than Ranger's health. It restored a measure of justice, hard-won and deeply deserved. The triumph, however, extended beyond that small, fluorescent-lit room. Maggie's ordeal catalyzed swift action in policy circles. New guidelines were drafted, codified to prevent such exclusionary denials in future emergencies, mandating accommodations for individuals with disabilities, recognizing service animals as essential partners in health and safety. The bureaucratic wheels turned faster now, propelled by the urgency Maggie's story had sparked. More than a personal victory, Maggie's voice transformed into a clarion call that resonated far beyond downtown sidewalks. Legislative hearings invited her testimony, her words carrying the raw authenticity of lived experience. Disability rights organizations harnessed the momentum, mobilizing allies and lawmakers alike to cement protections that transcended one moment, one lockdown. And standing unwaveringly by her side was Ranger, the embodiment of resilience, a sentinel of hope. Together they moved forward into a future reshaped not only by crisis, but by courage, their bond a testament to endurance and the relentless pursuit of justice. The locked doors behind them faded into memory, eclipsed by the light of change they had ignited.